Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heal Thyself, a conversation on mental health in games from a game designer's perspective. We're going to be talking a little bit about what kind of catharsis and reflection is available to game designers when they are using mental health themes or personal stories in their work, how to handle mental health themes in a way that's safe and healthy for the person telling the story, and also in a way that's safe and healthy and respectful to the players, and also just the general mental health highs and lows that come from making a game and putting a piece of personal work out there into the world, whether it's a mental health theme or not, because whether it's a deeply personal narrative driven game or whether it's just like cyberpunk 2021, putting a game in the world is stressful regardless of what the theme is. So I think that's well worth discussing and digging into as well. The title for this talk comes from the well-known gaming convention of healing or picking up health. I saw on the Gaming the Mind Twitter recently, might have been as far back as May, but someone had shared a screenshot from Psychonauts on mental health absorbed, and someone had commented like, oh, if only it were that easy. And the other inspiration for the name is the saying, physician heal thyself, which means if you're so good at giving advice, why don't you take it yourself? And that was a thought that I had many times during the development of my first game project, A Hero's Guide to Gardening, with my company, Tea Creature Studios. By the way, my name is Rachel Clancy, and I am a game designer with a very small two-person studio called Tea Creature Studios. I'm the co-founder with my partner, Ida. And as I mentioned earlier this year, we released our first title, which is A Hero's Guide to Gardening, which is an interactive narrative game, kind of a playable comic book that aims to introduce young players to mental health themes. And it was our first game. We are a very new development team, and that came with its own kind of stresses, the uncertainty of doing something you've never done before. We were supported by the Sky Women in Tech Scholarship, so there was this kind of expectation around putting it out there and having people see it, and having the people who funded us wanting to do something that was worthy of their acknowledgement. And then on the day of the launch, I made the classic mistake of pushing the final version of the game to the App Store with a game-breaking error. And so my launch day was just sat kind of watching a car crash happen that I couldn't do anything about, and just the overall stress and strain of it. I should have drawn on the mental health themes in our game, because we talk a lot about dealing with setbacks, dealing with developing resilience, learning to ask for help, not beating yourself up when things go wrong. And I should have done a bit of a physician heal thyself when it came to dealing with those ups and downs. And one other kind of factor that that came into thinking about this talk was about two years ago now, Sashin and I did a panel for EGX on mental health in games, and afterwards there was a Q&A section where a member of the audience asked about a game that they were working on, where they were kind of telling a personal story about anxiety and depression, and they said that they were struggling with kind of some of the feelings that were being brought up, and that kind of sparked a discussion in the panel about, there's no obligation to draw on personal material if it's like not healthy for you, and that making a game in dealing with a personal narrative, it should be cathartic and a tool for reflection. But if it's getting to the point where it's hurting you, then there's no shame or harm in kind of walking away from it. And I thought that is an interesting topic in terms of how now people are really embracing games as a storytelling medium for mental health because of some of the amazing things that games offer as a medium for storytelling. But maybe people out there are thinking, oh, I would love to tell a story, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to, or I don't know how to do it, or I feel vulnerable telling a story in this way. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our lovely panelists, the first of which the aforementioned Sashin Shah of the organization Gaming the Mind. Sashin, would you like to introduce yourself in your own words?
Sure, now I need to think about it. My name is Sachin Shah. I am a mental health doctor, and I am a founder and trustee of the charity Gaming the Mind. And our goal is to improve the mental health of people within the gaming community. And so that is gamers, and that is people who make games, and trying to raise awareness and reduce stigma so that everyone's able to have that open conversation. We believe that games have the potential to be really good for mental health, and so we like to champion that within the gaming community.
Wonderful. And my second panelist is my friend and tutor, Federico Fasce. And I had to do a little check to make sure I was saying the name correctly beforehand, but Fede, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Fede. I am a teacher. I teach at Goldsmith. I run a program in independent games and playable experience design. I'm also a game designer. I work quite a lot on personal games because it's both a thing that I like to do. It's my area of research right now. I'm doing a PhD about that as well. So yeah, I kind of like work on that sort of area. But I also do game design consulting and tutoring for students and people that want to go into the game industry. So that's me.
Fantastic. And as I mentioned, I was your student back in 2018 to 2019. Yeah. Initially, you were the co-course leader with Phoenix Perry, and then you went on to take over the course for independent games and playable experience design. And I, as your student, I think you championed the approach of really kind of challenging what are our preconceptions about what are the what a game can be for, the kind of dichotomy between a fun game versus an entertaining game versus a game that's used to convey kind of a powerful story. And I just wanted to ask, as a kind of introductory question, what do you enjoy about being a games teacher, and why did you move your practice towards teaching?
I think it kind of happened, but if I have to think about myself, I always been a very curious person, trying to understand things, and games are my main interest, so it goes naturally there. But I always have this urge of sharing what I find, because I think it's just how it is. You find something interesting and then you want to share with others, and teaching is a good way to do that. But it's not just that, because it's kind of like a bidirectional approach, where when you are in a community of practice, especially with university students, I try to be more like a peer than a teacher, and try to I lead them because I have, of course, more experience, but then they teach me a lot because they bring to the plate their own experience, their own vision, their own perspective, and that is like incredibly enriching. So I count myself really lucky to be in this position and can do this thing, because it's something that helps me a lot, because yeah, I understand more that way, and I hope I can be helpful for students as well.
I mean, from experiencing that environment, I completely agree with that environment of having other people around you to springboard off, and just constantly seeing like, oh, what's that person working on, or oh, that person's done something I've never even thought of before, and it's just like gasoline on a creative fire, in terms of just having other people to ping off of the whole time. And Sachin, you gave us a little bit of an intro on gaming the mind, but for you personally, as your profession is you work in the mental health space. I'm not sure do you have your official title within the space, but what made you kind of pivot or decide to undertake gaming the mind as a branch of your professional practice?
Yeah, I guess my professional title would be psychiatrist, but I don't know. I prefer mental health doctor. Psychiatrist sounds a bit intimidating, but yeah, so we started Gaming the Mind about 6 years ago. Within our psychiatric training scheme, there were groups dedicated to other art forms as they relate to mental health. And, we definitely see a lot of celebration of those kind of links, especially with regards to literature and film. And Gaming the Mind is actually, the name of it is a play on a group that already existed called Reading the Mind, which was to do with books. And we thought there is plenty of association within video games and mental health as well. And we want to look into it and see what links there are in both directions. So one thing that our group was interested in was how mental health is represented within games. And the other side of the connection is how video games can influence mental health. So you see a lot of talk nowadays about therapeutic gaming, but also how to play in a healthy way. So there was certainly lots of things that we could talk about. And the thing about then becoming a charity was that we were finding these conversations that we were having were great conduits or lenses for everyone to understand mental health. And I think we've got an audience or a target audience of people who maybe aren't reached by traditional mental health messaging, say from the NHS or from other charities. And we think, okay, well, let's talk about it through the medium of games and see if we can get people to relate in that way. And so we found it a really useful tool to reach out to people and raise awareness of mental health through talking about how games address it or how game makers are affected by it. All these different things get you thinking about mental health and how it might affect you.
I think to your point on reaching people in a form they might not have been previously reached, I was thinking about the pop-ups that Gaming the Mind has had at gaming festivals. I think they're called Save Point, where you sort of set up these sort of like low sensory chill out spaces where if people are feeling like overwhelmed from kind of the hustle and bustle of the kind of convention floor, that they can come, and there are your volunteers are there, and there's also kind of mental health resources there. So even if a person is kind of just entering out of curiosity, they're going to come into this space, which they possibly didn't expect to find at a gaming festival, and then get that kind of mental health education.
Yeah, I need to shout out the Australian charity Checkpoint, who also do great mental health messaging through video games. So they were running checkpoints over in Australia and also, moving over to America. And we thought, let's work together, and we used their expertise and a lot of their know-how and also a lot of their material help to start doing this at EGX back before it was virtual. And we did it because we saw there was a need for it. Like EGX itself, not Rezzed, but EGX takes in about 80,000 people in a week. It's really busy, lots of sensory stimulation. And even me, with my experience of going through conventions, and I don't have I'm neurotypical and I don't have a mental illness, but I find it very intimidating. I'm quite shy, introverted, and there's a lot going on, and you do need to decompress. And it's not so easy, actually, just to sort of find a space on your own and try to chill out, because there's a lot of social connotations to that as well. So we wanted to make a welcoming space, but also had in mind that there were people who might have particular need for such an area. So people who have anxiety disorders, people who are neurodiverse, so autistic people, for example, who may not get on with the sensory stimulation so much. And we found that through feedback, we were really providing a service that people found valuable. Not just people who came in, who, we saw people who needed a chill out from everything that was going on and really benefited, but also people who didn't come in but thought, well, it's great that you are here in case I need you. So yeah, we really thank Checkpoint for helping us set that up, and it's been really valuable.
I think there's, in neurodiversity and in kind of disability activism and advocacy, there's the idea of like the curb principle, in that if you put provisions in place for a group that really need it, for example, having a low sensory area for neurodiverse people, that it will go on to have benefits for everyone who uses that space. I think that's a lovely thing that comes through in what you're doing with Checkpoint. I'm going to go back to Fede, and I'm going to ask, within our course, you would share with us like a huge buffet of inspiration in terms of different types of games. And there was a lot of kind of interrogation on like what makes a game a unique medium in terms of kind of the interactivity and the fact that it's not a passive medium that you consume, like watching a film or reading a book. What would you say would be kind of some of the top things that games offer in terms of telling a mental health story?
Well, I think a thing that comes back to me constantly, it's really the fact that when you design a game, what you're doing is actually designing a space, and this space has some rule. In this way, it's very similar to architecture. because you have like some things in architecture, you have materials, you have shapes and stuff, and you create an experience. And I think the digital space, even when you are doing a narrative game, when you're doing like a branching narrative, what you're doing is actually designing a space for people to explore and be in. And just the fact that you are in that space and you experience those rules, you experience how the space works, it gives you a different perspective, because it sort of enacts a dialogue between you and the person that has created that space. But that dialogue comes into this sort of weird liminal thing, where it's not given that you are you are taking everything from that. You are making your own experience in a way. You are negotiating that meaning on your terms, which is, I think, really, really powerful, and puts like you and the person who has conceived and created the game in this really strange relationship and connection. But that is very powerful as well, because it's less unidirectional, but it's more an exchange, because you are inevitably bringing your own experience and your own perspective. And it's also like a little lab where you can experiment something that you don't know, or that maybe you have a different perspective about something and you can experience it in a different way. You can, especially there are many games like multiplayer games and stuff like that are really, really amazing identity labs. You can experiment a different identity and see how you work in that sort of world. And the rules, the way the game space works, is what allow you to do that.
I think it's a saying that's true of art in general, that it's finished in the mind of the observer, it's finished in the mind of the reader, it's finished in the mind of the player. But because of the inherent interactivity of games, that kind of, I guess you call it like the emergent quality of like, you can make something and give it to people and you don't know what they're going to do with it. And for something that might be a deeply personal experience, watching how other people have unexpected reactions to it can be very moving. And I remember showing the game Human Vacation Bureau, which was at Rezzed, where I met Sashin back in 2019, and this game where you are able to basically you play as a soul who's booking their next vacation on Earth, and you have to choose what kind of life you want to have, or what kind of life events you want to have. And it was I was always nervous about bringing that game and bringing the other game, Get Closer, aka Sad Frog Simulator, into that space, because they are quite tender and sensitive games. And we did have some players trolling and being like, we just want to make this frog as depressed as possible and kind of do the like absolute depths of sorrow speedrun. But then watching people play the game and kind of use particularly Human Vacation Bureau of like, oh, I didn't get to do this in my life, or my life is limited by such and such kind of physical constraints and I've never been able to do this or that, and just watching, I didn't realize that it could have this potential for being something very poignant. And I think what it did for me as a game maker is it made me challenge my preconceptions about what other people would think of it, and like, that there's like, Red Dead Redemption upstairs in a room with like inflatable tentacles, so who's going to care about my like soft little emotional game about souls. And it was very powerful. And I think for someone who might be going through something difficult, seeing other people relate to what you've made can be very heartening and very validating and reassuring. So that same question, Tashin, as a group, I think there's well understood idea of like art therapy or music therapy, where a person can use physical art making or music making to express how they're feeling. Would you say that games offer something unique to someone who is wanting to make a game as a way of kind of dealing with something that maybe other mediums don't necessarily?
So yeah, I would say, this has been explored through mediums such as expressive writing, art therapy, psychodrama. The idea of catharsis is not well defined, or evidence maybe wavers on it as well. But like, I think the general way we think of catharsis as some sort of emotional release, which then comes with some element of insight. And it's been varyingly sort of discussed in terms of, like, way back in Aristotle's day, it was about, oh, you watch something that will trigger emotions in you, and that's part of the healing process for whatever reason. And then it became, actually, maybe it's the creators, the actors who are living this experience, who are working out ways through living it in a safe, non-dangerous space to resolve these feelings that they're creating. And then another sort of idea, which was that when you're watching a play, so this gets into a more of an interactive element, you see a problem posed at the beginning of the play and you start thinking of ways to resolve it. And I think that's maybe a close approximation to what video games are doing in the sort of interactive element of catharsis. I also just checked our Twitter feed for like every time we've ever mentioned cathartic or catharsis, just to see like what people say. And it's like things such as like horror games, offering people a safe space to experience negative, fearful emotions that they can then try and resolve. Things such as playing a rewarding game, either that's just like a non-stressful rewarding game or like a very difficult level that you finally achieved. People say that brings them some form of catharsis. There were even like games about COVID-19 that people are engaging with, which they think like, oh, it's a lot better way of doing it than engaging with, you know, the pandemic itself. And then like games that give you emotional experiences. There was a quote that if a game makes you cry at the end, all the better. And that was about Gone Home. Again, about feeling that experience and maybe coming to some sort of emotional insight with it. So I think games can provide those things. In terms of creating, again, it's that sort of idea of the same with actors and directors of the stage, that you are in some way through creating, living through difficult emotions and feelings and resolving them through the act of creation. I'm not saying that there aren't downsides to that, which we might get onto, but that could be the idea. And then what games I think will offer uniquely is this idea of interaction that, as you mentioned, that you don't know what the player is going to do with it once it's out there, and they might, you know, subvert it, or they might interpret it in a different way. They might project themselves onto it. And so there's more of an intention of that when you create a game, that you're creating a space where you are allowing that to happen. And that's the sort of invitation. And so that creates a bit more of a freedom aspect from both sides of the equation.
That room for something might happen that you haven't planned for. And that there's a potential to be surprised by the outcome, perhaps. But I tried to make a distinction between games and other medium. But after thinking about what you just said about plays, and kind of dialogue writing is something that would happen for a play, but also we use a lot of dialogue in A Hero's Guide to Gardening. And in the experience of doing that, what we had to do was kind of construct these conversations which offered multiple answers, and we tried for each answer to kind of tell a different part of the story. So we had to kind of go through the process of imagining what someone's misconception about a particular issue might be. For example, in one scenario, one of the characters is very anxious that her garden is being overtaken by weeds, and your player character is very dismissive, and she's trying to say, like, don't worry about it, like, you know, stop stressing, like it's nothing to be afraid of, and not acknowledging how the other person is feeling. So we had to go through this process of like, okay, what are a bunch of kind of different ways you could dismiss someone's feelings, and then from that have the second conversation where the character becomes a bit more sensitive and a bit more empathetic, and kind of digging into what the nervous character, why they feel that way, and then trying some different approaches to what might be a kinder, more understanding thing to say. And I suppose that kind of having to really look at a problem from all different angles, imagining not only how you would like to be treated, but also how someone might misunderstand you versus how someone might be able to do something better. And just a lot of kind of ruminating and meditating on that subject, I think, was something that I hope I will remember again in the spirit of healing myself in the future. But yeah, it was a great kind of very intensive meditation on different feelings like anxiety or sadness or fear. So again, on the subject of making mental health games, Fede, I remember at one point during our time on the course, and I've just flagged that this is a bit of a content warning, but it's just a mention of kind of suicide or suicidal ideation. But one of the students had come up with an outline for kind of a piece of like live action role play type game where you would be reading someone's diary and kind of going through clues. And at one point you would enter a room and there would be like a noose hanging and some diary entries around the idea of suicide. And I remember the student kind of sharing it with the class, and then the class having a discussion that that some people found this a bit insensitive and a bit kind of triggering and a bit provocative. But at the same time, there was also the counter argument of like, this is this person's story to tell, and who are we to say that they can't tell it? And yeah, I just wanted to ask about the idea of kind of being sensitive to particularly kind of painful issues like things like sexual assault or like serious mental illnesses. And what advice would you give for someone who wants to bring this into their game but is concerned about how it might be, how to do right by players in terms of handling them?
Yeah, that is actually a very interesting question that came out this year as well. I think there is definitely, it's a delicate area. Well, I would say first of all, the work that you do as a game designer doesn't happen in a vacuum. So it's really important. It's always extremely important to not keep it to yourself until the end, and try to show it to people, try to talk to people about what you're doing and see, different perspective. And of course, if it's your story to tell, I would say trying to be honest about that, trying to be really, really, upfront. And maybe if you feel like there are parts of the game that can be too strong, one good thing is the use of metaphor. To kind of like overcome that and tone it down a little bit. I would also say that we, to a point, we have to accept the fact that our work might not be received in the same way by everybody, and there will always be someone that is more sensitive, and so that of course reconnect to the sense of the idea of being really honest and being really upfront. If you feel like it's needed, put trigger warning and content warning. That is absolutely really, really important. But there are games that have done that in a really brilliant way, and I can think of two. One is Welcome to Elk, which is a game I'm absolutely obsessed about. And this game, starts in this very kind of like cheerful cartoon, also like quite light way, and then it goes deep into very, very hard, like that's a very dark story to it. But then it reports filmed interview to people that actually lived that stories, and you realize that it's like the way that they constructed it is just about showing the human side of it, even of a very dramatic story, how people lived through them. And I think it did it in such a beautiful way that sort of resonates and treats really, really hard and dark matters in a very delicate and respectful way. I would say actually other two games. One is Before I Forget. Before I Forget, again, talks about early stage dementia. It's a very, it's a very intense topic. But it does it from a very human point of view, for a very, graceful and understanding way. And that makes everything a little bit more approachable, is that this is a human experience and we could go through that. And here is a gentle way to show it to you. And I would say, yeah, another game that you can look at to draw inspiration on how to do these sort of things is Everything Is Going to Be Okay, by Alien Melon. And that one is an amazing, kind of account of mental health struggles that is made in this weird acid sort of net art way. But again, she does that in such a relatable and honest and open way that then, the sort of like friction, I think, happens if you just deliver that in a cold way. But if you put yourself into it, if you really show that that's something you went through, and it's something that you want to talk about in an honest way, even if it's triggering, can be helpful for people, I guess.
And Tashin, with your extensive knowledge and personal library of mental health themed games, would you also have some similar recommendations in terms of games that can take on kind of heavy, serious subject matter, but do so in a way that feels kind of sensitive and insightful?
Well, I mean, the two games that I keep going back to as ones that seem to do the topic of mental health justice do handle just rather serious topics. And that first one would be Actual Sunlight by Will O'Neill, I believe. And I particularly like that game because it is very rooted in reality in terms of how depression and suicidality can affect you within a day-to-day working life. And it's very narrative heavy. I think, again, the importance of having warnings about what will be handled within the game, very important. And no graphic depiction within that game of what goes on. But just on that note, I would sort of refer to the Samaritans have guidelines on media depiction of suicide issues, which aren't rules, but they're useful guidelines. If you're going to sort of break them, you should know why you're doing that as an artist and understand the implications of it. And the other game would be Please Knock on My Door. Again, really insightful look into how depression affects you in day-to-day life. And it sort of gamified the aspects of exertion. So, what are you going to put effort into and how will it pay you back later on? And as the depression develops, you can see it becomes harder to do things that should be easy, such as eating, showering, getting ready for work, that kind of thing. And the game aspect really drives across like, okay, you playing this may think that you should be able to do this, but here's how you're limited by the depression that's going on around you. And so again, that one deals with some rather heavy themes towards the end. It's not graphically depicted what goes on. There is, again, metaphor and hints and things like that. But again, not done in a shocking manner. I would compare it to Doki Doki Literature Club, which is getting a release soon or now, which had graphic depiction of, and you've already given the content warning, a graphic depiction of a hanging. And although that had content warnings at the beginning, I think people were rather distressed by, certain people were rather distressed by that depiction. And the re-release has updated warnings and warnings within the game prior to certain scenes as well, which I think is a good step in the right direction.
I think an interesting point that both of you mentioned is, I remember reading once someone described journalism in the form of kind of graphic novels, or kind of journalists who are cartoonists, in that by kind of rendering something in a medium that is seen as kind of interpretive or slightly softer than a photograph, that it allows someone to stay with something difficult for longer, and that it's a way of helping people to stay with kind of challenging or potentially kind of upsetting material in a way that's a little bit without kind of throwing up your defense mechanisms of like, oh, this is very graphic, or oh, this is very shocking and scary. And I think it's this there's a couple of things in that, within like the creative craft of putting something into a metaphor. I think it opens it up to interpretation, and other people can read themselves into it more and interpret it and take away from it in their own way. And as well, it just softens that harsh kind of just a verbatim recreation of reality. Yeah, and as we were talking about this, I was thinking that like we're having a conversation about how to do things sensitively, and then at the same time, some of the most popular games out there are just bloodbaths, really. And it's like, how to sensitively portray a zombie apocalypse? No, we are again exploring and challenging the remit, and again, all games can live within the ecosystem of games. There can be games that are just splatterfest, and there can be games that are thoughtful interrogations of mental health issues. And Sasha, I thought your point about the Samaritan's best practices, I think was really great, in that that's just a practical resource that people can go to, and just even for their own information and own curiosity, see what they have to say. Because I did a mental health first aid course at work recently, and they even spoke about kind of the language you use around suicide, like to say completed suicide rather than committed suicide, in terms of trying to destigmatize that language. So I think if people are interested in this space, just that there's best practices you can learn, and you can inform yourself about how to do things correctly. So let me have a little look. Okay, so now we have talked about mental health themes in kind of the literal sense of actually telling stories about depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. So now let's talk about our own personal emotional roller coasters that we've gone through in making games. And Fede, I wanted to ask you, as a game maker who has made personal games, who has made games for or interactive experiences. I remember you telling me about work you've done for The Guardian. Would you like to share your own experience of the highs and lows of making something and then having to put it out into the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of like a roller coaster, and it's sometimes it gets really, especially when I work on my own personal games, because I don't have the constraint of, I have to do this. I feel like there is one game in particular that I made that kind of was just connected with my personal life in a very deep level, which is called The Ballad of Past Lou. And I did it on Christmas. It was 2 years ago, I think. And I was in Italy, and at the time I was undergoing a therapy process, which was my first. And it was kind of like very, very hard taking out very, very old thing that I got in the past. And I started making that game because I wanted to make an interactive graphic novel, basically. And it was just a way of telling like sort of like Charles Dickens kind of like story, nothing terribly, evolved. But then while I was making that, some things started happening in my life when because I was at home in Italy. I was with my mom, and I had a very deep and frank discussion about what I was going through in therapy, and about, things that came up in the past, which was basically experience of being bullied in secondary school and having like taken a long time to heal and recover. And my mom was, I always felt like my parents didn't really understand what was going on. And then I realized that that was me, that I wasn't opening to them in the right way. And my mom came to me with this little piece of paper. And it was a little piece of paper that some of these people that were bullying me wrote to me. And I got that, and I bring it home. I actually didn't bring it home. My mom kind of recovered it. But anyway, like the thing was like, while I was doing this game, I realized this woman has kept this thing for 30 years, and that sort of thing, it just stayed with me for such a long time now. I need to make this game about that, and I need to just free myself of that. And, the game was kind of just dragging around, and in I think an afternoon, I kind of put everything together. I finished it, and then I was inspired by Welcome to Elk, which I played at TGX a few months before the demo, and so I recorded myself at the end, just talking about, how did I feel about this character that is like a little fox that in many ways represents myself. And it was kind of like making this game was like so deeply intertwined in what I was living, and the whole process really helped. I think really helped dealing, really helped understanding better what was going on and how I was dealing with such a thing.
How did you feel about the idea of releasing it and sharing something that was so kind of personally affecting?
I don't have particular problem with that, because as I was saying at the start, I really like to share, and I feel like, it's a human experience, and I don't think I'm the only one. I don't think, I think it's just something that if I put it out there, might help someone because might resonate. And for me, when I talk with someone about my experience, and that someone talks about their experience and they resonate, it's really, really helping. And it's actually what happened. I got a lot of message from people just telling me, oh, like you you talk about my experience as well, and it was so deep and it was so intense, and then it always gives me like this weird feeling of like, oh my god, that's other human people, like there's other human beings out there that have had a similar experience. I'm not alone. That is like something that we can help each other, and just the process is really important, I guess.
That's wonderful. That kind of validation of seeing something that has come from you, but also seeing it reflected back in other people.
Yeah.
That sounds like a resoundingly positive experience. But what I want to dig into is the suffering. Maybe I might ask about, have you ever done any kind of commercial work or work where there was an external expectation on you to produce something that you found stressful, or have you been blessed to have a sort of smooth career of actually putting things out for kind of public release?
No, I mean, definitely there have been cases, particularly at the start of my career, when I started actually being a game designer, I was in this company where nobody was really experienced, and we were like kind of like struggling through the whole creating. And it was like, I'm a game designer, I've been hired as a game designer, but I have zero idea on, you know, how to actually do things, and I'm struggling. And I think in that case, I think there was sort of a lack of communication and acknowledging that eventually brought everything ending not really well. Also, yeah, there have been many. I mean, I worked for a project about making games that sort of map psychological questionnaires. And it was really difficult because I was working for a company that wasn't making games, to make them understand the complexity of it, and the need of putting more work and more people onto it. And all this just gets very quickly very, very stressful, and you have to, you know, try to find ways to release that stress, because then, you know, you have project manager telling you, oh, but this project, you know, has a very high stakes, and you try to make it work, and you know that you don't have like enough resources or enough experience to make it work. And that sort of place is a very dark one. It gets very dark very quickly, and can lead off, you know, you convincing that you have to work more, and then you get into crunch, and then you get into burnout, and that's a vicious cycle that has to be absolutely avoided, because it destroys you, and it takes time to heal. I think, again, after the first experience, I got back to the university. I took 5 years at the university. I worked as a freelancer in web development, and I didn't want to talk about games to anyone. I was really, really hurt about that, you know. So that are things that can happen, and we have to be really aware of that, I think.
Yeah, I've even though my situation with making Heroes Guide and your situation of working in a kind of a company and an organization are different, because on paper I could be my own boss, and that ultimately the kind of pressure came from within myself. But that feeling of, we don't know necessarily what we're doing, someone has trusted us to be game designers and to make something, so inexperience is going to stress you out. Second of all, I think something that is uniquely stressful about game design in particular is the fact that one of the things that makes games wonderful is that they are this like merging of art, animation, writing, programming, like music, sound design. Like there's so many, like you can just keep adding value to it. You can just keep adding and making things better and better and bigger and better. But for a small team, like we were, I think between 3 and 4 people at any given time in the project, who, like, I was trying to be a project manager, I was trying to be a game developer, I was trying to be a writer, editor, like a sound effect generator. And it was just so much of a workload, and then trying to do that outside of my day job. And then I think within the team, trying to kind of give people their roles and kind of manage people's expectations. And then managing my own expectations as well, because I think something that I struggled with a lot after launch was that we had been working on this thing for the bones of 2 years, and I was so excited to share it with people, and I had been talking about it for ages, and because of the scholarship we had kind of been we were sort of brand spokespeople for Sky, so they would get us to do these PR events and talk about our work, and I had to kind of sell the work, and that like it's going to be this great thing, and that we're so excited about it. And so I had also built it up in my mind, and then we launched it, and I screwed it up. and it wasn't screwed up in the long term. It was just like, it took me 2 days to fix it. But before then I had already spoken to journalists. I had already sent an email out to my agency that I work for, which is about like over 100 people. And just the embarrassment, and then just this feeling that like this symbolic kind of high point didn't go according to plan. And I was very kind of hurt about it. And Freddy, the thing you mentioned about like you just didn't want to talk about it for a while, I need to go on the App Store and just like look at some reviews, I think, because I can't face looking at it right now. So with all that being said, Sash, in your professional capacity, taking some of those kind of waypoints along the way, can you give advice for game makers in terms of managing things like expectation versus reality, a healthy workload, team dynamics, and just how game makers can be kind to themselves when undertaking making a game of any kind, whether it's mental health themed or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the general advice of, practicing self-care and like what you said at the beginning, that there's no obligation ultimately, and there's no harm or shame from walking away from it. I went into sort of the safety measures that are employed within, say, art therapy and acting, just to think about like, how can people take care of themselves when making these sort of personal games. And I think what you mentioned about, games aren't made in a vacuum. Like anyone who makes a game completely on their own, hats off to you. But like, think about it within a team, is that if you are putting yourself out there, you might be sharing things that other people don't know about you, or that you don't know about yourself. And so you have to do that in a careful, measured way. One is in terms of, has everyone consented and has everyone agreed to sort of having this sharing going on, and not to sort of spill over into oversharing, but also then how other people are going to react to you and your art within the team in terms of feedback or anything like that. So you want some agreements of like, do I want to hear what you think about this? And then when people give you feedback, it should be framed as, well, this is how I reacted when I played this or when I saw this, and not, this is what I think about you because of this. Like, now I realize that your life is chaotic. You don't want to do that. You want to be like, I played this and it made me feel a certain way. So, being careful about interpretation, but also being ready, I guess, for when you release the game, that players are going to interpret it how they wish. And they're also going to see it not only through it being a story of your life, for example, but also judge it as a game, and not to try and conflate those two things. Like, okay, maybe people didn't get on with it as a game as such, but that's not an indictment on my life. That's not them judging me as a person. But yeah, so there is this thing about respecting boundaries within the team and having that balance and having trust with each other. The other thing is that you will be perhaps addressing difficult, challenging concepts, and to always keep a check on how that's making you feel. And that could be something as tangible as writing a diary, like, okay, what thoughts are these bringing up? Because the risk is, that you might try to soldier through it because it's now the job you've given yourself, but it might be triggering very difficult emotions in you, perhaps even, if you're talking about risky things within your game, because people might be able to live risk in a safe way by channeling it through art, but is it creating risky thoughts in their mind? And just to keep a track on that and to act on it if you realize that that's what it's bringing up in you. And I think the final thing is just, to keep it short, is just what actors do. And there's this concept called de-rolling, which is actors have to keep a separation between themselves and their characters. And there is a risk that if you don't successfully keep that separation, that you end up carrying a lot of that negative stuff into your life, and maybe carrying those negative personality traits and losing that boundary between who you're playing and who you are. And actors have actual skills that they develop within certain cultures. So I was reading an article about how within Nigerian acting, they don't have this concept of de-rolling, but certain Western cultures, they do, of maybe even physically doing things to derobe themselves of it. So like they think like, oh, I'm brushing off this characteristic, I'm brushing off that characteristic, meditating, or thinking about their own name or what they used to do before they took on the role, things like that, as a way of separating yourself. And you can take that into game development, which is, okay, what is the difference between me and the game I'm making? And once I step away from the game I'm making, how am I still myself? Those kind of thoughts that you might want to have just to sort of produce it in a safe way.
I think a particular consideration of making a game in lockdown, in terms of even just like the physical divides of like, this is my workspace and this is my home life, just completely dissolved. So living, working, eating, sleeping in the game space at all times was probably another very stressful contributing factor. I really like what you said about within the team sort of agreeing on how feedback is going to be communicated, in having that as like an upfront conversation at the initiation of the project, in terms of, first of all, who's entitled to give feedback about what, because I realized early on, like, my background is in graphic design and art direction, and Ida, my partner, created all of the art for the game essentially on her own, which was a Herculean task. And at the beginning, I was probably not as supportive as I could have been, because I was constantly trying to like stick my oar in and be like, oh, maybe if you did it like that or did it, and then we basically had a big blow up. And I had to learn to just basically that if she's the artist, let her be the artist. I have other jobs to do, and I have enough other jobs to be doing without kind of stepping on her toes. And once I kind of gave her that trust and just let her get on with it and do it in her own way, it was a lot easier and a lot of a kind of happier process for her to work on it that way. Yeah, team communication, keeping morale up, I think, is a big thing. I think because I'm a bit of I tend towards kind of the anxious and the kind of trying to plan for things going wrong. So I would always be in this mindset of like, oh, if we don't hit this deadline, X is going to happen, or if we don't fix these dialogues, people are going to think that we didn't do enough with that segment of the game, as opposed to a more kind of I guess celebrating milestones and being kind of positive, like, oh, we've done this much, wow, for a beginner team who's never made anything before, like, this is an incredible thing that we've the incredible opportunity we've been given to learn. And something someone shared with me once is that this is going to be your first game, not necessarily your best game, but you've got to make this one first, so that you can learn from it, and then you'll build on it and you'll make another one, and they'll hopefully keep going in like an upward positive trajectory. So I had to learn a little bit about like positive self-talk for getting through that. And one last piece of advice I would like to offer from my own learning experience of making this is, if you enjoy the process and you keep your mind on, I love making games and I love the creative work, and if you're in a situation like we were, where we're making this as a passion project, and it's not that we're employees at a game studio and we're kind of making this and it's coming from us, but so long as you stay focused on the fact that you love making it and that it's fun to make it, then the finishing point doesn't matter as much, because you had a good time all the way through and you stayed focused on what you were learning and actually enjoying the ride, and not just getting too focused on the end point. And I think it's that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So the extrinsic motivation would be like, oh, we're going to get a great response from people when we release it, and we're going to get loads of congratulations and all that kind of thing, as opposed to intrinsic motivation, which is we enjoyed every step of the way of making it, and it was a really cool thing for us to make together. So that would be my 2 cents on the process and kind of some things that I found helpful in trying to navigate the highs and lows. So we are coming up on almost the end, and firstly, I think I just want to make sure that I ask if either of you would have anything coming up that you'd like to promote or share. I know that you've been working on the game with 3 of Cups, and that's coming out. I don't know if it's released yet or if it's going to be released soon.
It's going to be released soon. Yeah, we are in the process of, setting up all the other non-making a game release kind of thing. It came out from an internal jam that we did. It's called Summer Gems. I'm actually very happy that it's coming out, because it came out from like a pitch that I gave the rest of the team, and it's about kind of like transient friendships when you live. I used to live in the Mediterranean, basically on a beach, So you make these friendships that last like 1 or 2 weeks because the person is there for 1 or 2 weeks and then they disappear, but they are like sort of magical and interesting and human, and I try to just like reproduce that sort of feeling. So yeah, that's hopefully in the next few weeks will come out.
That sounds beautiful. I've seen some of the art for it, and it just looks like
yeah, the art is amazing.
Sweet summertime game that's full of gorgeous eye candy. Sachin, is there anything that you'd like to talk about from a Gaming the Mind perspective?
No, not really. Not in a particular event or anything coming out, but I mean, we're always trundling along, talking about mental health in games. So if you want to continue the conversation about mental health in games in general, come follow us at Gaming the Mind on Twitter. We'd be glad to have you, and check us out at gamingthemind.org. That's our website. And yeah, always doing the mental health gaming thing.
You've been, I'm not sure if you've done any recently, but there are recorded podcasts that yourself and the rest of your team have done if people wanted to check out you guys in conversation with some of your other members. I think those are posted on your website.
On our website. One podcast which I've been editing for a year, but it's just so unwieldy, is going to be one on catharsis, which will be interesting to listen to, because we get into it.
Catharsis, the watch. I was when you mentioned catharsis at the front, I was like, oh God, I hope this isn't like one of those kind of like words that is so vague and expansive that it doesn't mean anything, like general self-care, general catharsis, general wellness. Cool. So I just wanted to make sure, because I think we're coming up on time, but last parting shots. Fede, I wanted to ask, do you have any recommendations for anyone who's watching who is a beginner game maker just starting out and who might want to tell their story? What sort of game making resources would you recommend for someone who's got a story to tell and is just starting out in their journey of learning how to tell it?
Well, I think a good way, if you want to go digital, would be things like Twine or Bitsy, because Bitsy is very approachable. It's very simple to use in particular, and I think I also run a short course in game design for people that never made a game before, and I've seen that Bitsy is always, I always think, oh, it's too limited, but then again, people get creative with that and they produce really interesting things. So that would be definitely one of the things to go. But I also would say probably just try to write it in a way that can be like a live action RPG or something like that, because there are like a lot of, one page RPGs that just explore a tiny slice of experience that you can play with friends, and it could be just a good way to have a conversation with someone else. And so if you design that space, I think that is in particular is very good for letting you take confidence with this idea of designing a space that has rules and put people into that space and see how they interact. So without any sort of technological support, just writing a page and trying to see what comes out of that.
For sure. I think that's like the best advice in terms of like, if you're interested in making a game, like you don't have to start in digital, that there's a whole world of analog games out there that are so valid. I was thinking as you were speaking of Joe, my classmate's game, The God of, where it was kind of like a Mad Libs where you where you fill out this form where you are the god of X and you are giving X message to the people and you feel X, Y, and Z in your human body. And it was a lovely, like very poetic, well-written game. It was so simple, just like a paper form that people filled out. And Sachin, would you have any mental health resources that you'd like to point our viewers towards in terms of your own organization, which you've already mentioned, but I know that there's so many, and I've been kind of looking into them myself in terms of kind of finding partners to have a look at our Game Heroes Guide, guys like Safe in Our World or The Shape of Gaming. But if there's any that you'd like to recommend, please do share.
Sure, there are lots. So, I mean, first of all, just from a mental health perspective, Mind, such a great information resource in the UK, and I would always urge everyone to go to Mind if they want to find out more about mental health in general. And just, I always do safety netting. So, if you are feeling unwell, don't hesitate to seek medical attention. If you're feeling immediately unwell, don't hesitate to seek emergency medical attention. But if you want to just find out what you should do, 111 in the UK is a standard non-emergency line where you can discuss what you should do next. Or you could call the Samaritans if you want to talk about anything. And that's they maybe get thought of as a suicide line, but you can talk about anything that's on your mind with Samaritans, and they're open every day, including Christmas, all the time. With regards to gaming, Take This, probably one of the longest standing gaming charity, mental health charities operating in America. Checkpoint, who we've worked with in the past and they're so lovely. Check them out. Safe in Our World, as you mentioned, in the UK, and Rise Above the Disorder are doing some great stuff as well in terms of actually funding people's healthcare. That's in America. So yeah, just keep those resources in mind, I think.
Perfect. I think that's everything. Thank you so much for giving me your time and your wonderful insights and ideas and stories. And yeah, thank everyone who's tuned into us. And ideally, we'll all be on the Discord server if anyone wants to ask us any questions, or you can reach out to us on our Twitter handles. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Cool. I think that's it. I think this recording stops when I end the meeting. But guys, thank you so much. That was really great.